Brian Tyler, Emmy-nominated composer for 1883. You and your co-composer, Brett and Vivian, also work on Yellowstone. So where did you guys
Yeah.
start in creating a music language for 1883 while also keeping it in the Yellowstone universe?
You know, the thing is, when I work with Taylor Sheridan, he's amazing. Who directs and produces and writes Yellowstone in 1883. He always comes to me, and the first thing he wants me to do is, before getting involved in the actual scenes, is to write themes. And this is what I did on Yellowstone, and went down, sat at the piano, and started writing, and then it eventually became what Yellowstone is. On 1883, he sent me the screenplays, and it's this, really amazing, dark, stark, epic tale, that is the origins of kind of the growing period of America, and for all of its dreams and nightmares, and so I read the story. I loved it. The screenplay, it was very engaging, very emotional. And so, I sat out to write this music that really echoed the story, but also the tone, and we discussed kind of broad strokes. One of the things that we wanted to do was create something that was outside just the kind of the Western style music that you hear in films, which is kind of, there's kind of a stylistic to kind of mode to that music, and really we wanted to be more mythological, more ancient, in that these are people that came from other lands, and they came here for a dream. And so the music is really a part of world music from all over, that's much earlier, that people kind of imported to the United States, and it became part of the music that we know as the Old West, but it's before that, really. So the music sounded almost like, it's like gypsy music. People that people come here, they weren't playing, everything was translated into people that were basically either fleeing something or brought here, or all sorts of kind of the circumstances were almost always hardship. So you didn't have, a Stradivarius, you had a fiddle. You didn't have, this wasn't the music for the wealthy and that kind of thing. This was music that could be played by a campfire, and then those kind of tunes were then brought into an orchestral realm that sounded like almost like dirges and folk music, and things that you would sing, melodies that you would sing as a lullaby to your child in the face of impending chaos and tragedy and all these things. So it's a very emotional score, and that's what Taylor always leads with, and that's what I always lead with, and I think that's why we get along so well.
I do love, we'll get to like the main theme in a second, but I love what you're saying about like the sound, because it's very like old timing, the fiddle. It does feel like it's like an immigration or like a migration of instruments. So what kind of instruments do you actually use to achieve that?
Well, so it's everything that, there's kind of two layers here. You have these soloistic things. The first instrument is the human voice, and it's the first thing you hear in 1883. It's really the daughter's voice, the character in the series that really starts the narration and everything. It's Elsa Dutton, who's the story of the Duttons is Yellowstone and 1883. So it's the daughter in this story, and she ends up being really the haunting voice, very literally and figuratively, throughout this whole thing, because of her story arc. And so that starts, then you hear the hurdy-gurdy doing the same melody, which is this kind of really old instrument that sounds it sounds like it's out of time. It's not something that's really used today, but then set against those themes that are very like again, like a tragic lullaby or melody that you would sing both at a birth and a funeral. And that's kind of how music was used a lot at the time. You know, it was a luxury to have different people come together and play music, and so they marked weddings, births, funerals are like the big moments in our lives, and in that way, when it became orchestral and it became the symphony and it became a choir, it was, instead of doing something that sounded like polished, it was using the melodies that could be sung to a child or sung at the end of someone's life to comfort them, but had a certain sadness contained within it. So the instrumentation went from very simple all the way up to choir and orchestra, but maintained this kind of folk sung quality to it.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Just like your main theme, and the full theme is 8 minutes long, and it's so rich and gorgeous. And like you were saying, it conveys like the same like hopefulness and also hopelessness as they're journeying west. And it's like it's heroic and also resilient, and also kind of a lot of sadness to it too. So what went into writing that, and did you set out to make an 8 minute long theme?
Yeah, it's kind of how it seems to, it's something I love to do. I love to really tell the whole story in one main theme, and that I could kind of go back and delineate things that are more specific throughout the story. But it's the kind of thing where I'd read the story, and that's what I originally wrote and sent to Taylor, to just like kind of close your eyes and think of the whole story. And you can hear how it starts with, you know, the idea of its tragedy from the beginning, and there's kind of this thing that is certainly, you know, part of you know, the storyline, which kind of is this idea that it's the American, you know, the pursuit of these people for their dream was also a nightmare at the same time, and that's something that's said within this storyline. And it's kind of the gloss sometimes of history, depending on who it's told by, can gloss over those dark portions, which the story does not. It dives deep into it. So writing such a, you know, writing a piece that was 8 minutes for a theme, it needed to capture kind of these moments of aspiration and hope, but also the other side, the tragedy and losing children and loved ones to all sorts of the elements, or to greed, or to, you know, all of these things that are part of the human experience. And it was so assertive just reading it, and let alone watching it. And I'll tell you what, which was very cool about Taylor, is that he took that 8 minute theme that I wrote, and then they started filming. See, I did it before they filmed, and then when I actually find all this out later, when I meet all the actors later, and
He played it for them?
yeah, so what he would do is every day on set, he would play it through the speakers every day, and he gave it to each of the characters, and was like, this is important to you to know what this is. And they had memorized it, and it had become part of their life by the time I even went to score the individual scenes. So much so Tim McGraw is one of the main characters. He used the theme in his world tour. You know, it's this orchestral theme for 1883, which introduced the encore of his entire tour. So, you know, as they come back for the encore, the thing you hear is 1883 played, and they did visuals for it, and everything is really something. So it took on as really a life of its own, in terms of the energy and the vibe of all the actors, and even the set designers and the costume designers all knew it, and the cinematographers and everyone. This theme was a part of it. Even when we went to the premiere, as you walked into the theater, which was a beautiful theater at the Wynn, when orchestra was playing it live, so yeah, that theme became really such an identity, as such part of it, very much so a character in the story, which is often the case, but this was even more than would usually happen. And that's why during 1883 there are times where the theme plays by itself and all the visuals and the sound is turned off and you just see the story unfold, but the music tells the story, even where you see people speaking or crying or howling out for mercy or whatever, and you don't hear them at all, just the music's playing, and it was very powerful. So it's a great way for Taylor and I to start on any project.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, now you could say you've like sort of been on tour with Tim McGraw. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's fantastic. He's amazing, an amazing actor and musician, and it was great being a part of that tour. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, Brian, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you back in a little bit.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Thomas Mizer and Curtis Moore, Emmy nominees once again for writing a song for the marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Maybe Monica. You guys joined in season 3 writing songs for Shy Baldwin. So what did Amy Sherman Palladino say about season 4 when she called you back for it?
Usually not a lot. We don't. She likes to surprise us. And I think in this case, every time we would pick up the phone, it would be a new request. And we would hang up the phone afterward and say, is she punking us? Is this exactly a joke? Because it would go from, hey guys, can you write a song for a stripper in a bathtub? Then the next day it would be, can you write a song for Harry Belafonte? We're like, are you kidding us? So it was a joy just to be able to be that tested in a way and to try on so many different forms and styles.
Yeah. Well, that's why I asked, because last time you were tasked with writing a massive pop hit for Shy, and this time Maybe Monica is a song for Harry Belafonte to sing. Yeah. And so why is she constantly giving you guys insanely difficult tasks?
I think she likes to tease us. No, I think with Maisel, she's always trying to push the envelope a little bit, and I think with this she was really looking to just have a added bonus to what we're already doing, because we also wrote a song for Shy in that episode, his next hit, and obviously the moment with Shy this season was different. It's a sort of a bittersweet moment because we know his story at the end of season 3, and then in season 4 we see him getting married. It's sort of a little bit of a surprise, I think, both to us and to Midge. So coming in there to give those moments was a really fun challenge. And writing for Harry Belafonte was incredibly difficult too. It's probably one of the hardest assignments we had this year, because we kept thinking, why not use one of his famous songs? There's so many amazing songs that he's done. Why are we writing something new? Shy Baldwin, it makes sense. That's a fictional character, so we're writing his stuff. But this is a real person, and it was a really tough challenge.
Yeah, we probably wrote more options than we've ever written for a song for Maisel for that we threw out. And there came a point where we were showing them to Amy, and we didn't feel right either with what we were showing. We're like, we just haven't cracked it. And then she finally gave us the best note. She said, stop thinking about it as one of his big songs. Think of it as a present, as a toast that he's giving at the wedding. It's like a best man's toast. And suddenly, boom, it's story. We can write that. That's a reason for us to write it, because suddenly it's about character. It's about Harry making little jabs at Shy. And
right. It's like an inside joke. It's not meant to be released to the public for public consumption.
Exactly. And it was really fun for us in that song too, because we as writers and us as the audience know a lot more of that story than anyone that even Harry Belafonte knows. So like, it was fun for us to kind of thread both of those needles. What would Harry's group do that's kind of hilarious and funny, but then also what can we do that's a little bit of commentary on the situation.
Mm-hmm. So what were those early songs like before you were able to crack it, before you got that note from her? What did they sound like? Do you recall any lyrics or melodies?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When we start these things, we put a playlist together, of just getting us in the era. So we had sort of a really great playlist of songs that we were listening to a lot of Harry's songs, but other types of songs of the era, and that kind of gave us this sort of vocabulary. We just kind of lived in that for 2 or 3 days because that's really all we had. And we just started writing a whole bunch of stuff, but we just kept coming to the conclusion that like we're not quite nailing exactly what this is. And like Tom said, I think once we got to that point, we did end up taking a little bit of another song and putting it in this one. But we always knew it had to be an up tempo, always knew it had to be a very high energy song. And so that was kind of fun that where we ended up with the song.
Yeah, there were a couple of like story songs. There was a lot of like sort of like you're at a wedding celebration, sort of mythology songs, and we're just playing with all kinds of different things. And it ultimately had to be personal, and also had to sort of play with the ideas of the episode, which we're sort of asking the question that the episode's asking, which is why is Monica marrying Shai? Why is this happening? And so we get to have that fun of layering that in.
Yeah, and then hopefully it's a bop at the same time. So.
Exactly. Oh, the most important thing is that everyone's
it's very
dancing at the reception.
catchy. Yeah, it's like that like calypso style. Yeah. Well, so how quickly were you able to write it? Maybe Monica, after you got that note, did it come pretty quickly to you guys? How many versions did you go through?
I mean, that did come pretty quickly. We really had to get it done so fast. We're such theater people. We're used to like writing a show for like 8 years. And then this is like, we had a couple of weeks to write them, but we weren't cracking it. And then we finally got information from Amy. We probably finished the song in a day and a half, I think was probably what we did.
Wow.
But at the same time, if you went into our iTunes library, you would hear 40 different versions of Maybe Monica, where we're singing it back and forth to each other and changing a lyric, changing just a little melody thing, because it's all about making it feel effortless. So we would listen to it again and again and again and go, nope, that little section, that's not feeling right. Okay, so unfortunately, our poor spouses have to, when they put iTunes on mix shuffle, every once in a while it's just a bad
a lot of me singing.
You should just release those as bonus.
Oh gosh, no one wants to hear that.
No one wants to hear.
We were just laughing that we were saying that everybody on Maisel now has like 300 versions of me singing these tunes. But it is true, we're very iterative when we go back and forth. We're not in the same space. I'm in New York and Tom's in LA. So, a lot of times when we are together, we like to write together in the room. But when we're not in the room together, it just is a lot of back and forth and emailing where, it's really like a Where's Waldo, like, what did we change? There's like one tiny little thing we might have adjusted and we're sending it back and forth. Yes, that's it. Or no, go back. So it's, that's kind of our way of playing around when we do this. And it happens really fast. In the case of this, once it was approved, I think we turned around and recorded it the next week.
Wow, that's awesome. I want to mention another song you guys did. They Came, They Dance, from the fictional musical of the same name. I love fake songs from fake media.
Yes.
And this is a bad musical. I think it's described as a musical set in the mountains. So how did you guys go about writing this song?
Well, again, this one was we got a very quick assignment that was just that title. Amy said,
cruel. It's the cruelest title because you have to rhyme with dance, which is not easy.
Exactly. So we had that title, but we didn't know anything else about it. So we wrote the title song, and we had been told that there's one good song that they sing over and over again. So we took that and ran with it and said, let's write this song, and we're going to have the hook repeat over and over and over again. And then I think we also had fun because not knowing what was going to do, we wrote 4 other songs from the musical. I mean, I feel like we could do an entire evening of that bad musical because we have all of that material. There's even a moment when we were working on an overture to accompany them coming into the theater. We ended up cutting all that, but we did all that work of that musical. And of course, you hear such a small amount of it, but it was such a blast to put that together.
And some of the best Broadway performers in the world are singing that ridiculous song. And
it's so silly. I was just listening again this morning. It was like, this is like so ridiculous, but it's the only good song from that show.
Yeah. And it was really sweet. That was a really sweet moment too. It was the first time we recorded after COVID. So we got to bring a lot of our songs that our theater friends in. And it was a really sweet day to kind of get back in the studio together and start making music again.
Mm-hmm. Well, lastly, have you heard anything about what you need to do for season 5? Has she given you another impossible task?
Yes, maybe the most. And I wish we could talk. We'll talk about that hopefully sometime
next year.
We are right in the middle of it. It has been really epic.
truly insanity.
We'll chat back in next year. So,
Absolutely.
well, Tom and Curtis, it's great speaking with you guys. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back in a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Siddhartha Khosla, you are a double Emmy nominee this year for Only Murders in the Building for composing the theme and the score. I want to start with the theme, which is incredible and really encapsulates the world of the Arconia. It's kind of sneaky and quirky and melancholy. And I know you sent John Hoffman, the showrunner, a motif, and he immediately said that's the theme. So how did you come up with it, and what was your reaction when he said that? Like, that's it.
My background in music is a songwriter, and so before I ever composed anything, and so for me, I always hear everything around a melody. It's always like the first thing. So I read a script, and if I'm lucky enough and I have a good day, I'm on a good day, I'll have like a melodic idea that just comes out of it, and then it just starts the process. So for the Only Murders theme, I heard this like do da 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 da, and I just, and so much of my influence too from my band days comes from like 1960s stuff like the Beach Boys and Donovan and the Beatles, and so there's this quarter note pulse that's happening. It's this like plucky piano thing that I'm doing. It's just like it's like a three chord progression, and then it shifts to like a second section after that. But I sort of came up with that melody and those changes, and I played it for John over the phone. It was over like a Zoom call early on, and he's like, "What is that?" And I was like, "I don't know. I'm just like, this is just something that I've got." And I think in my mind I was like, "There's no way this is like anything." Like I really, and I think that's like the beauty of collaboration too. It takes somebody that you're working with to like believe in what you're doing too. Because I certainly never really believe in the stuff that I'm doing. I just do it, and then somebody oftentimes is like, "That's the thing. Let's go with it," and that inspires me to keep going. So John immediately heard that, and he was like, "That makes me feel equal parts sad as it does happy, mysterious and melancholic, lonely, and I feel like something's afoot, as well." So it happened to sort of cover those bases for him, and yeah, it just became the theme of the show, the main theme of the show.
It's so versatile too, because you reimagine it so many times throughout the whole season, and now in season 2 as well. So how do you go about just varying it up throughout the episodes and like whatever the scene calls for?
I think there was, I've worked a lot with Dan Fogelman as well on This Is Us, and Dan is one of the producers on this show as well, and something that I learned sort of working with all those guys is it's never there's nothing wrong with sort of like sticking with a theme, and don't shy away from it if it's a good one. And it creates something incredibly filmic. It's like, especially when you have an ensemble cast, and you have so many different players in a show. Just like we had with This Is Us, or we have now with Only Murders. Only Murders has got all these amazing players that come into the picture. That you have all these people who live in these different apartments in the building. So having sort of a few sort of thematic threads that go through the whole thing keep it all together, and for me, so much of it was early experimenting. Like I experimented early on, even before I saw a picture, with just different sounds, and I wanted to hear that theme, because I knew that theme, the main title theme, has that sort of like very sort of like 60s quarter note pulse with that percussion, which are those Home Depot buckets and the vocals and all the strings. That doesn't really work in the show as itself, because then it reads sometimes a little comedic in the show, and the show is like, I'm scoring it like it's like a drama, like a prestige drama is sort of the approach, like stay away from the comedy, and so there is this sense. The show, it takes place in the Arconia, which is this pre-war building. And so I always like to think of the sound of the show as what it sounds like inside the walls of the Arconia. And And so we were fortunate enough to have, you know, an orchestra play on every episode of this score. And I think with just like, you can be creative with the way you orchestrate stuff. A melody like that could be really romantic too if you slow it down. It could also be really dark if like you change the voicings underneath, or you don't change the chords underneath and you're just pedaling on like the tonic and low octaves. It can feel menacing all of a sudden. So I think when we committed to that melody, we were able to sort of adapt. And also, this is a team effort, you know, like I've got wonderful orchestrators that work on the show with me. You know, some of the guys that like worked on like Wes Anderson scores, Wes Anderson film scores, and which is also very appropriate sort of like,
yeah, definitely.
You know, that this fits in that world a little bit. The Grand Budapest, that kind of thing. And so it's a team effort, you know. Obviously I can write this but the orchestrators are playing a big part of helping sort of change it up too.
Well, your nominated episode is the best episode of season 1. I think everyone will agree. The Boy from 6B, which is told from the perspective of Theo, and it's dialogue free. So your music is most of the audio that we, the audience, hear during the episode. So how did you approach this episode when you found out what the premise was?
It's interesting because this is a completely silent episode of television. It was a big swing for the show, told from Theo Demas's perspective, and it's all communicated via ALS, you know, in the whole episode. So things that you hear are score, and you hear the incredible sound design from our sound design team, and it's just like, it's basically the sound is what it sounds like from inside from the perspective of somebody who is deaf and who has that impairment. And again, it's collaboration. Julie Monroe, our editor, was key in this. Shireen Devis, who directed the episode, key. And so we all worked together very early on in terms of finding what it was. At one point, there was going to be no music. It was just going to be sound design. But then as we were cutting and seeing picture, all of a sudden we decided, no, there needs to be a lot of music to help drive the narrative here. And honestly, it's like, I credit our editor. She was just really, really great about knowing where we wanted music. I worked with her too in places on that. You know, the music also was under a microscope now for the first time, really in series. And so every note mattered, every sound mattered. The melodies, I brought the melodies out more because the melodies sort of, normally when I'm scoring something, the dialogue is sort of like the lead singer and I'm the band around it, you know? And in this case, there was no dialogue. And so the melodies had to really tell the story. And it was challenging for sure. Cause like, you know, but it was so much fun. I remember when we started it, I was really like, how are we going to do this? This is going to be really challenging. Like, I've never scored a silent movie before or anything like that.
But it was really great because I love, like, especially in scenes between Zoe and Theo, there was music because it's kind of romantic, but also sad because obviously now she's dead. And then, as you were saying before, you know, adapting the theme when he pushes her off the rooftop, it's very dramatic, and it's like a string rendition, and it's like a full orchestra for the fall. So yeah, and so what was there, like, any section of that episode that was particularly hard, or was it just like the whole thing?
The whole thing was a challenge. I think that the challenge of that episode really was spotting it. You know, it was like, how much music do we want? Like, when do we really want it to drive the story? When do we want the ALS portion of it to drive the story? And I think that, you know, again, like, as anyone on this panel can tell you, like, there's incredible composers on this panel who are very, very experienced, or more experienced than I am in many ways. But, you know, spotting an episode is everything. You know, it's like where you decide to put music and where you decide not to. And I think that ultimately was a challenge. And it could have been wall to wall. I could have scored the whole thing. It would have lost its magic. But I think here that was the challenge of like, when do we want to, when do we want to score? One thing that we did realize in the process was this also had to be some of the biggest score of the season. We didn't want to rely too much on like the smaller, there are some smaller intimate moments, but as you said, that moment where he pushes her off the roof is like the most operatic we'd ever been in season. And the score there is, I had to sort of, make it as sweeping and operatic as possible, because it was the only thing driving it, but you couldn't hear what anybody was saying.
Yeah.
But again, I keep on going back to the collaboration. It's just like the performance from Theo in that is just heartbreaking. Nathan Lane is heartbreaking in it. I mean, it's a tremendous episode. I'm just lucky to be part of it.
Yeah, for sure. Lastly, you earlier referenced the Home Depot buckets. Those are that's the percussion and the main title theme. So what happened to those buckets after you guys recorded?
Well, I have to call my drummer and ask him.
Okay.
But it's a good question. And to the, going back to buckets for a second, when I turned in that theme to John originally, the note back there were multiple notes that came back from producers. Fogelman called me and he said, how do you make this as tough as possible? Very Fogelman note. He always wants me to go as big as I possibly can. I'm always pushing to be small. So he said, how big can you go? Jess, another producer, said, how do you make it more New York? And taking those two things, and John also said it too. And I think you realize that in this show, you're living in this, the building itself is a character, right? It's a pre-war building. You have people that are grandfathered into like $400 a month rent, and then you have people who are super wealthy who live there. And so there's this dichotomy of rich and poor, and there's a socioeconomic diversity to the building and to New York generally. And so that was a moment to convey that in the score.
Yeah, it's like
and
just
so
busters, like just
yeah. And so James McAllister, amazing drummer who plays with the National and Sufjan Stevens, good friend of mine who plays with me a bunch. I asked him to get some Home Depot buckets and play this groove over the theme, and it's like he's like jamming on it, and it sounds like somebody in the subway playing.
Definitely.
He mic'd up his kit. I don't know what he's done with it. They're probably in his
text him right now and find out.
I will. They're in his garage somewhere, but I'll text him. I'll find out.
Well, Sid, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you back in a little bit.
Thanks, Joyce.
Thank you. Christopher Willis, Emmy-nominated composer of Schmigadoon. This is a very fun homage to the golden age of musicals. So were you a fan of musicals before you joined this show?
I was a fan of musicals. I was a big fan, I think, especially of the movie versions, which is what our main focus was. I wouldn't say I'm not one of those people who grew up being completely obsessed with them. I just sort of had always admired them, and I wasn't obsessed enough with them already to do the job that I had to do. So I had to become a lot more obsessed with them in order to do what Cinco Paul, the showrunner, was after. So I definitely went on an adventure, rewatching all the big ones from the middle of the 20th century, and there's a funny effect. Even when you think you know something very well in a sort of everyday way, it's very different to then watch something or look at something with one thing particular on your mind.
Right, because now you're on a mission. You have to study it.
Totally. Like I was even watching non-musicals. I was watching things like Disney movies from that period. So say Mary Poppins. I've watched Mary Poppins, of course, since I was a tiny kid, but I've never watched Mary Poppins and asked what the oboes are doing. I was too interested in the plot before, but Owen Costal was the underscore composer on Mary Poppins, and he's an absolute genius. And so yeah, you can watch Mary Poppins and just think about what the underscore is doing, and it sort of opens this whole world up. It's a curious experience if it's something that you thought you knew already.
Mhm. So what did you learn in this research, studying the underscore of Mary Poppins and all these other musicals, and then how, I guess, like, what did you and Cinco also discuss as to like how to approach the score for the show?
Well, Cinco knows all of this terrain really, really well. So he's a wonderful collaborator with all of this stuff. And of course, he wrote the songs himself.
Yeah.
And it turns out, rather maddeningly, he's an incredible songwriter and has been writing songs his whole life. So it's not really a surprise. Well, the first thing is that it's not all in that world. So we spend relatively short but quite important amounts of time now in the present day. That's where each episode starts. And so even though it's not a very long time that we spend there, I think it's quite important. So the way that it looks is very different. The color grade is different. The way that the camera behaves is different. And so we talked right away about the fact that the way the music behaves should be different. And because it comes first, it does sort of establish itself in this quite important way before we get into the actual, before the characters get lost in
Or
the woods and they end up in Schmigadoon. So that was sort of a thing to figure out early on to present you the show and to present you the sound of the show in a way that lulls you into thinking that you're going to be just watching an interesting, romantic, sad, intriguing show set right now. And one of the things that we started to realize, which I'm not sure we had quite realized we would be able to do, and we had such fun once we discovered this, is there's no reason why the songs shouldn't be seeded in the modern music as well as in the underscore of the that's in the style of the 50s. So especially if you've watched it once already and you know all the songs, when you go back, I think it becomes much more obvious that the songs are hidden everywhere in the score. Well,
because that's also another aspect of your job, because you have to like transition in and out of songs, right? So how did you go about seeding elements of the songs into the score then? Like these Easter eggs, I guess you can call them, as you said.
Yeah, that's right. Well, actually, and this sort of goes back to part of your other question that I didn't answer. So sort of unlike all of the other entries in this category of the Emmys, I was sort of channeling what the underscore composers of the 50s would do in a big MGM musical, which is I'm taking all the melodies from the songs rather than using any new themes. And that was another discovery I made watching those old musicals. I knew that's what they did, but I didn't realize how incredibly clever they were at doing it. And I didn't realize that they did it so consistently. So in a single scene of Brigadoon or South Pacific or The Sound of Music, the underscore might quote quite a few of the song melodies. It's as though the movie is an opera, and the themes of the hooks of the songs have become leitmotifs that mean important things, and the melodies turn up in the orchestral score. In fact, they form the entire basis of the orchestral score in a very psychologically interesting way. These were people who were reading Freud and were very interesting people. So the melodies of the songs are turning up, and it sort of seems like it might all be a bit pretentious, but actually you feel it as if you're in the middle of watching The Sound of Music and you hear the melody of one of the songs. You know it. In fact, your sort of subconscious, your heart,
you recognize it even if you can't name it
instantly, and you feel the emotion, you feel the connection. So it's all very high concept, but it's very clever and it really works. And even to the point of putting the melodies on top of each other, which they would do. And it was really a who's who of great composers working on those movies. You might have Carousel has Nelson Riddle did a couple of cues, and Alfred Newman did a couple, and it's insane all of the people who are working on. So when you watch thinking about this, you start realizing that they're actually possibly even competing with each other. So you hear people will say we're in love, and Sorry with the Fringe on Top are happening at the same time, superimposed on each other. And when I saw that was the kind of thing happening, I sort of had my head in my hands like, oh no, Cinco must know about this. This is exactly what he has in mind. So I had to get to know his songs incredibly well, so as to try to do that sort of thing. His melodies are great, and it turns out there are ways to do that. So there are times in the show when two of his songs are heard.
They're like overlapping.
Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite pieces in the premiere is at the end of the Trick Bridge, because it's kind of like whimsical and mysterious. And then when Josh and Melissa, they think like they're gonna escape, and they reach the top, and it's this like really quick crescendo, and then it just stops. And I thought it was just really funny. So how did you go about composing that, and deciding that it'll be like that brief, like it'll just cut off, like it doesn't actually last or like stretch out?
Yeah, I found those moments when I had to get big were quite tricky, because we always wanted it to feel like a movie, like a big MGM movie, but often there wasn't an enormous amount of time. It meant just really going for it and going over it again and again, going over the orchestration again and again, thinking, am I getting all the colors that I want to get into this relatively brief amount of time? Am I saying the right thing? I've always felt, looking at the old musicals, that the decisions they made were so well considered. Even if the texture was quite simple, the decisions they made were right, and the emotion, the choice of instruments, the instrument was always playing in a register that felt right. So it was a question of sometimes doing quite simple things, but so with a big crescendo like that, just doing it quite simply, but making sure it feels sweet and right.
Mm-hmm. Well, finally, are you returning for season 2? It's going to be in Chicago.
I am, and I haven't seen anything yet. They're shooting right now, and they are, I think, nearly done with shooting. And yes, I don't know that much, but I'm told things get emotionally complex. I have a feeling I'm going to need to watch a whole bunch of different musicals from last time. That seems very likely.
Yeah, because now I think they're in the 60s and 70s, so it's
that's right. Yeah. I didn't know if anyone knew that yet, but yes, that's what I've heard too, that I'm going to be looking at a lot of Sondheim and other kind of 60s, 70s things. I think that's an amazing development for the show, so that things we almost come to miss the way that things might have been in the old days, when when men were men and cows were cows, which is a lyric from one of the songs in season 1.
Awesome. Well, Chris, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you back in a little bit. Theodore Shapiro, double Emmy nominee for your music on Severance, and this is a reunion for you and Ben Stiller. You guys go way back. So what was it like working with Ben on a series as opposed to a film?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that was just amazing about the experience is that Ben has just this remarkable ability to just keep a massive amount in his head at one time. And so, because I don't work on a ton of series, the scope of it is so is so tremendous, and it's, with a feature, you can watch what you've done, at a screening and get a sense of like, oh, okay, this is working over this 2-hour span. With 9 episodes, you have to put yourself in the hands of your showrunner a little bit more. And so I was fortunate to be working with somebody who I trust so much to sort of guide us through it as far as the large scale scope of it.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about the theme first because it's so simple yet haunting, and it's just a couple of piano notes. And I know that it was originally part of a larger piece that you had written, but then zeroed in on that specific section. So I guess what was that original piece, and did you have conversations about him of like why he liked that part so much?
So the first thing that we talked about after I read the script was, let's try to do something that plays on a dichotomy between the innie world and the outie world. And, maybe we'll do something electronic for the, cold and electronic for the innie world, and something warmer and more organic for the outie world. And so I had written this electronic piece, and it had this sort of section in the middle. And when I flew to New York to meet with him and look at the sets and the lookbook, and before they started shooting, and we listened to some of the stuff that I'd been writing, just sort of exploratory pieces. And he kind of kept fast forwarding to this section in the middle, and it had this kind of cool chord progression. And I just thought, like, I should do something more with this. Like, he's clearly interested in this idea. And when I got back home to LA, I kind of went straight to the piano and I sat down and I put my hands on that chord progression and started playing it sort of exactly in the manner of the beginning of the main title. And it was just this big eureka moment, because it was like, oh, okay, so this could be just the palette of the whole show. Like, it's not about a dichotomy between innies and outies at all. It's about presenting the whole show as a puzzle or a mystery, which is really what it is. And so I sent it to Ben very, very hopefully, like a 2.5-minute version of it. And it was crickets. I heard nothing for like weeks and weeks. And I was like, oh man, like I really thought I was onto something there, but I guess not. And then like finally he called, he's like, this is great. Like, I love this. Like, this is really exciting. So from there, we trimmed the 2.5-minute version down to about 1.5 minutes, and that became the main title.
He ghosted you.
He totally ghosted me. And it was weird because he'd been very, very prompt up until that point. He'd been responding pretty quickly.
He just got lost in his email, probably. So.
Or something, or whatever. He got busy, but
yeah.
But anyway.
Well, I also love like the second half of the theme, because it becomes a little bit more like warped and glitchy. So how did you go about manipulating the audio, I guess? Or I don't know. I mean, what did you do to achieve that sound?
Well, so I mean, I think you're talking about the end of the cue where it has that sort of very glitchy effect. Well, so that sound is actually just a piano note. And what I've done is it's a reversed piano note, so it gets louder as it proceeds, and then cuts off sharply. And then as it goes, I'm adding distortion to it and then chopping out little tiny snippets of audio randomly, so it has this sort of stuttery, glitchy effect. And I just sort of thought that could be an interesting, because the whole theme is on a piano, I just felt like having it glitch out could be somehow representative of the idea of the sort of fraying of the self. And so, we did that with the theme, and then of course it ended up getting incorporated into the score as the season progressed.
Right. Well, one thing I found so interesting with the score was the progression of it throughout the season, because at the beginning it's very economical and sparse, and then becomes more propulsive. And then by the finale, which is your nominated episode, it's just music everywhere. You don't even know if there's a scene without music. So
there's not
to that decision to just have the score all over the place.
So at a certain point, I was talking to Jeff Richman, the editor, and we just had this notion of like, what if the last episode is not just wall-to-wall music, but really feels like one unbroken cue. And so with that in mind, I wrote a tremendous amount of music before I'd seen the episodes, kind of all in the same tempo, but then doing different things, sometimes halftime, sometimes double time, sometimes going into 3/4 time. And then, you know, so that there would be this ability to kind of stay in the same tempo and with the same propulsive feeling, but then just take it to a lot of different places. And then, and Jeff is so good at cutting with music. I mean, he was a total partner in this whole process. And so, you know, between Jeff and the music editors sort of helping to weave things together, and then writing, you know, and then writing original stuff, you know, we were able to sort of make this tapestry that I think hopefully feels like one piece of music, but that is in fact a bunch of things stitched together.
I mean, and also it has to culminate at the ending sequence when it's just cutting back and forth between all those different settings. So what was that, working on that part, stressful between just like working with Jeff and the editing and just finding the right, I guess, peaks for the music? Yeah,
no, that, I mean, some of that was built into what I pre-wrote, but then some of it, you know, particularly the very end, it, you know, it felt like it needed more weight as we were working on it. And so, you know, we had a good foundation from what was there at the start. And then I was able to just sort of build on that and enhance it to get it to the size where it needed to be eventually.
Was there ever a discussion of maybe pulling back on the music in that episode? Like, did you guys ever say like, maybe this is too much?
No, we like, that was the plan and we ran with it. And you know, I think that at a certain point it can be more jarring, you know, if you're writing almost through an episode and then the music cuts out and then comes back shortly thereafter, it's almost more jarring than if you stay in. And so at a certain point, I think if you're through composing, there's a merit to just staying in.
I also think by that point, you're so invested in the story that sometimes you don't even notice that the music
absolutely. Yeah. And you know, and one of the things that we talked about from the beginning was that we were going to be willing to be radically simple with the score in that episode. Like sometimes it would break down to just this sort of propulsive, you know, kind of loop that sits below dialogue, and you know, and the music's not doing that much, but just sort of keeping the momentum going. And you know, that was definitely part of the conception from the beginning, was like a willingness to be radically simple with it.
Well, you mentioned you wrote a lot of music beforehand, so how much of that was actually in the final product?
Of that episode?
Or just the whole season?
Oh, the whole season. You know, it was an absolute combination. You know, I probably wrote over an hour of music before we started. And so, you know, because Ben and Jeff, the editor, were so good with music, a lot of times episodes would come to me and a lot of things were, you know, already had very good ideas in place for music. And so then there were places that needed to be written fresh. And so it was just always a combination of, you know, attacking the places that needed a fresh idea, and you know, refining the things where they had tracked it in, and just sort of using that kind of a team process.
So have you written anything for season 2 yet? Writing ahead?
I'm starting right now, and it's funny. I mean, it's a little bit of a terrifying process because you know, we've defined this sound that feels like the show. And so you want to stay true to that, but you also don't want it to feel repetitious. And so I'm just trying to find ways to expand the language, maybe take the harmonic progression to new places, or reorder it, or just find ways to keep it evolving without betraying what got us here in the first place.
I'm sure you'll figure it out. So
I'm glad you're confident.
Well, Theodore, it's great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. Welcome to our Meet the Experts Composers panel. We have 6 Emmy-nominated composers here today. Brian Tyler from 1883, Thomas Mizer and Curtis Moore from The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Siddhartha Khosla from Only Murders in the Building, Christopher Willis from Schmigadoon, and Theodore Shapiro from Severance. Thank you all for being here. I would love to know, what was the first piece of music each of you ever wrote? Let's start with Brian.
Oh my God, put me on the spot. I think the first, well, I guess that's one of those things, it's like a transitional species. You're not sure when it goes from noise to music. But the thing I really remember actually becoming something that I would play was I'd read novels, like science fiction novels and things, and then I would kind of do my own sort of quasi score to it by writing melodies and themes, and it was for the Frank Herbert book, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, those two combined. That's really where I felt I wrote like a full piece that really that made kind of musical sense. I mean, strange enough, so much so that when I finally ended up scoring Children of Dune for Disney, I ended up, because I had written a melody that way long when I was a child, to those books, I ended up making a nod to my kind of former dreamer self looking forward, and it's actually in the real score. So that's one that definitely I'll always remember because of that connection that ended up happening.
It's full circle. There you go. So.
Yeah.
Sid, how about you?
Are you asking what the first piece of music we ever wrote was, or for?
Yeah, do you remember? Can you think of it?
Yeah, it was probably one of the shittiest things like I've ever written. It was yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah, it's like, what point does it be like, kind of like there was an edge. I wasn't sure where. I mean, clearly the first thing is like 2 fists on the piano going gang gang. So I'm not sure if that counts though, but maybe.
John,
no, I think it was like, I don't know. I mean, I had a band in high school. We were called the Hip Hop Hindus, and
it's alliteration. So.
And like me and my best friend would just get together and just like write stuff. And I remember pulling out my flute and running it through like reverb, and it was like we thought it was really cool at the time, but I guarantee you it was not.
Like Tim Weisberg.
Can you find it? Is it on YouTube?
I hope not. There's no way.
I'll just find this or re-record them and upload this after this, so everyone can go check them out.
All these pieces can be the soundtrack to this.
Yeah.
This discussion.
I have to say, when you said this, I'm more of the lyricist of the two, so I feel a little like the Bachelorette with a bunch of bachelors. It's like all these composers, and who wants to connect with the one lyricist in the room? But sorry,
hand out the roses. So.
Exactly. Sorry, Curtis. So for me, it was like, when did I first? It was always parody lyrics first in college. It was taking songs I loved and rewriting the lyrics, usually in rude ways. But that was where just discovering those skills of rhyming and play and stuff, and then I wrote songs with Curtis. Like the first songs I wrote really were with Curtis in college.
That's cool.
Last year.
Curtis, what about you? What's the first song you wrote without Tom?
Oh, I mean, I had my dad was so great that he got me like an Atari 400. I was like using computers from 1981, so I was really into like electronic music then. But hilariously, the first time I really started to write was with my neighbor had one of those cassette 4-tracks, and like a Tascam. And I remember just trying to push the limits of that. And I would write all these crazy like theme songs to talk shows that I would then host myself on, tape recorder. This says so much about me psychologically, but like, so I would write my own theme songs with multiple harmonies, and I'd like mix them down till I had like 40 tracks, that I'd done on this like 4-track. Those are the first, and I still probably have those cassettes somewhere. God help
You
us
can
all.
submit them for future talk shows, like new talk shows, upcoming talk shows, and see.
Well, I might use Brian's technique, and maybe Tom, we should use those to like as our inspiration for the next songs we have to write.
It works.
Theodore, what about you?
So yeah, probably when I was like 10 or 11, I think I wrote my first composition, and it was terrible. I mean, I can tell you now, and it was like an A section and a B section, and I just repeated them over and over again, like, higher, lower, etc. My mom thought, it was genius, and took me to a composition teacher, and I played about 30 seconds of it, and he was like, okay, I think I get the picture. Like, I got it. So that was that. And then my mom was like, I didn't like that composition teacher very much. So that was it.
Your mom, your first fan, always.
Yes. No, very encouraging.
Chris, how about you?
I was going to say something very similar to Tom, which is that it sort of it's like the beginning of making things is sort of indistinguishable from just kind of nicking stuff and changing it slightly. Yeah. So it's all, I have all these memories of getting completely besotted with like the Heart and Soul progression, or the like Pachelbel's Canon progression. Yes. Like playing Pachelbel's Canon over and over and over for hours and hours, and annoying everyone with it. And then just gradually, eventually you've changed enough things that you're sort of like, hey everyone, I made this thing. Or I remember my my granddad showing me how to play the start of Lean on Me. And then I, could sort of steal individual chords from it. But I suppose that leads to the first thing that I really did. This is interesting. I didn't write anything down. My brother was doing a thing at school, like a review at school. They wanted to do a thing that was like kind of like 1929 at school. So they're doing all these sort of Depression era skits. And they didn't really have time or the resources to do the music properly. So me, his younger brother, just came, and I did my 4 chord progressions that I'd learned by then over and over for the whole thing. My little A minor thing that I could do, and my little like hot. It must have been so annoying and bad.
It's a younger brother coming in and stealing the thunder. So, well, earlier, Tom and Curtis, you guys were talking about how the Harry Belafonte song finally clicked for you when Amy Sherman-Palladino said it's a toast, not one of his pop hits. So can each of you name an instance at any point in your careers where something like that happened, like you got a note about something, or just, I don't know, or something happened where everything just unlocked for you and you knew this was the road you had to go down? We can start with Tom and Curtis again, not the Harry Belafonte song.
I was going to jump in. Tom and I are, we come from the theater world. That's like something, and we are still in the theater world. We're doing some fun stuff that is in production or will be soon. And I think one of the things that we get the option of doing that's so different from working in TV and film is that we get to, we worked so long on a piece of music or song for a long period of time, but then we get to present it in front of an audience at a preview. And a lot of times, we'll work on something, and usually if something's really hard, I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but if something's really difficult or really hard, it usually is because we're going at it the wrong angle. Like we're writing the wrong song, or we're writing the wrong moment for a song, or so there's something not right about it. But then the minute you put it in front of an audience, like they will tell you right away if something is working or not working. I love sitting in an audience of theater, and I watch the audience, not the show. And you just sit them, they'll sit forward, they'll sit back, they just very, very clearly tell you if they're not interested or if they really are interested. And I think those are those moments that, for me, really enlightening. And I wish we could do more of that when we're, working in TV and film. Sometimes you have no idea if it's going to work or not until it's way past that point.
Yeah, because it's kind of like a sitcom taping, right? You see what Joe lands with the audience.
A little bit for sure.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
definitely.
Tom, do you have anything to add?
No, that's exactly the way it is. It's something I miss terribly, is just that moment of, it's terrifying the first time you have an audience watching a musical that you've written, but we often pick seats purposely that we can't really watch the play. We want to watch the audience. We'll sit in a certain place so we can just sit and kind of watch where things are happening. And you just know something in your heart click, you go, oh, I knew it, as they just check out of a song at a certain moment that you knew it wasn't quite right.
Yeah, and you think to yourself like, oh no, that I should have known. I totally knew that the whole time. Like, I'm not sure if I totally knew that, but I'm gonna pretend like I did the whole time. And it just clarified that what my initial instinct was.
You sort of get some of that even in a meeting, don't you? In a Hollywood context. And that's so strange because you kind of been living with something on your own for an enormous length of time. And as soon as you hit the space bar in the meeting, you just know.
Right.
This is
what am I doing?
It's the most curious effect.
Did that happen to you recently?
Oh, well, the sad thing is, of course, we've been doing things remotely, so you don't quite get that same electricity. But I do love that process. And it's funny, you can have the opposite. You can have sometimes on TV shows where the schedule is getting very, very quick, and you're way into sort of season 2 or whatever. I would start getting familiar enough with the showrunner that the end of the episode is sometimes not finished. It's like it turns into a piano map, and then I start singing along and singing the drums. But if the idea is okay, normally the pitch goes fine like that. I'm sort of like, and now trombones, and now doo, doo, doo. And I can feel that it's actually he's fine with it. It's not a problem. But there might be some other bit that I thought was that I worked on so much, but I just know as soon as it happens in the room that
it's almost like sometimes, it's that, like you guys are saying, it's so true. The audience factor. I'll tell you when it most happens with me is when I go to on a film, especially if I go to conduct the orchestra, and sometimes if you overwrite for the orchestra, once you have 90 people or 60 or whatever it might be playing it, all of a sudden it overwhelms the picture or something. I remember doing a William Friedkin movie and it was like this action sequence, and it was like, whoa, hold on, it's like a hat on a hat. Once I heard the orchestra, I was like, oh my God, what did I write? It's this giganto, like requiem for it. So like went back to kind of almost like brought it down to adagio. It's kind of, mezzo piano, just letting them kind of these longer chords. I rewrote it over lunch frantically, by hand, it scribbles everywhere. And then you conduct it and they watch you and they imbue it with that humanity, and it just comes alive. Whereas sometimes when you're doing a mock-up, you're writing in your head, it's just, it doesn't happen the way it ends up being. And that's part of the beauty of kind of that error bar that is humanity, that makes it much more beautiful at the end of the day, and they give so much more back. So that's what I find. I end up attenuating once I hear it live.
Theodore, what about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just think that until you watch your work with somebody else in the room, you can't see it through an audience's eyes until somebody's sitting there in the room with you. And then suddenly you're not watching it through your own eyes, you're watching it through that other person's eyes, and you can see what it is. And that can be just totally horrifying, because you can think you've written this great cue and then you realize it's all wrong. Or you can feel like, oh man, I've got this score nailed, and then you go to a preview screening, and just like the minute the movie starts, you're like, this is not what I want it to be, or this cue is really not pulling its weight, or it's trying way too hard. And there's just sometimes no way to know until you can kind of see it through somebody else's eyes.
And sometimes it's the opposite too, right? You think it's not going to work, but then it's a hit. It goes
absolutely. Like, it's not always thinking that you're great and then being disappointed. Like sometimes you feel like sometimes you feel like you've just like tossed something off and there's nothing there. And then you realize, like, when you see it with an audience, you're like, oh, actually that's like perfectly simple. And like, it's good because I didn't think
it's like that section in your piece you wrote, and then that's
totally, which by the way, which was completely tossed off. Like it was the B section. It was like the part where I was like, oh, okay, I'll just do a thing here. And then that became the score of the series.
Sid, how about you?
I don't know. For me, it's there's I just keep on going back to just that collaboration and just really understanding the showrunners and who they are and why people are on the screen and doing and saying the things they're saying. And I think for me, that's always that takes some time. On Only Murders, it definitely took some time in the very beginning. I had to understand who John Hoffman was a little bit and understand like his spirit a little bit. And I think once I started getting a sense of who he was, and that's like the thing too, that like I wish we could do more of. Like I wish we could spend more time, and I don't know what everyone else feels here. Like I get very limited time with everybody that really is with the people who are actually making the decisions. And so I oftentimes have just like a couple moments, to like get it right. Like we're not at the point where I can audition and try things forever and ever and ever again. And we have a very limited amount of time. And so for me, the realizations happen like when I unlock something, it's often after I've had a conversation with John on a story that's something that might have happened to him, in childhood, or something that may have happened to him recently that inspired why this person was here. And I'm like, oh, okay, I get him now. And now that can inspire me to like use the auto harp instead of like a piano chord or something like that. Those like minor things make those differences for me. And sometimes I'm fortunate enough, like John and I just had a conversation the other day to talk about season 3 of Murders. And like we just had we got a Zoom, and I was like, I'm just gonna have a drink. He's like, cool, and we drank and talked. And after that, like I could hear season 3, and it was only because we talked. So that's it. Just communication and that collaboration, I think, is key.
I think you're right. Then we need more time. So what we should do is we should all be our own showrunners, write the show ourselves,
right?
Then we can all write the music, and we have plenty of time.
Yeah,
wow.
you give yourself your own notes. There you go.
But then we would have double the work.
It's coming from someone that directs. Like, no, it doesn't end up happening that way.
I know.
More. There's a whole other pyramid of time destruction.
Well, I wish I could spend more time with all of you guys, but we have to wrap. But thank you so much for your time here. It's great seeing with all of you, and congratulations again, and good luck at the Emmys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
everybody.
Nice
Thank you
meeting
so
you,
much.
everyone.
Great seeing you
Great
all.
to see everybody.
See y'all.
Big fan of you all. All right, we'll talk soon.
Bye.
See you soon.